So we've tested our application in the emulator, but there's a couple of things that I should explain about it in case you think you messed up creating this layout in the challenge. Firstly, when we tested it, you can see on the screen when I clicked the button, the message was added to the text view and the number increases each time. So that's working well. We should have cleared the original text first, so we'll do that when we get back to the code. And if I keep clicking a few more times, you can see that the text view fills up, and if I close down the keyboard and keep clicking, you can see that it's not scrolling and it's actually running off the page now. The text that we're adding here is disappearing. So that's the first thing you might think you've got wrong, but it is okay, and that's normal behavior. The plain text widget that we used when looking at the designer is an edit text. And that's basically a text view that's been extended to allow editing. Now obviously on an Android device you would normally need the keyboard when typing, so the edit text widget has been designed to cope when the keyboard is on the screen, as you saw. Now because you can't type into a text view, it doesn't have that behavior. So there's nothing actually wrong with the layout, it is working as it should. And if you did want the text view to shrink to accommodate the keyboard, you could actually do that in your code, although it might be easier to use an edit text and disable it so the text can't be typed. That way you'd get the benefit of the additional functionality that an edit text has for dealing with the keyboard while still having something that behaves more like a text view. And the second thing was that when I dismissed the keyboard and clicked a few more times so that the text runs off the bottom of the screen, you'll see that the text view doesn't scroll. So obviously there's no mechanism up here for me to scroll in any way. Once again, you haven't done anything wrong in your layout. The multi-line edit text widget scrolls when you set the scroll bar, but to make a text view scroll, there's an extra step we need to do in the code. The final thing to be fixed is that the message itself isn't very good. The button got tapped 2 times isn't very good English after all. So the program seems to be working fine so far, and we've successfully linked code to a button so that it responds to clicks and actually does something. So let's fix those 3 issues back in the code. So I'm going to come over here, close down the run window. So clearing the existing text from the text view when the program starts, it turns out to be really easy. But before you switch to the layout to delete the text property, I'll show you another way of doing it, because we could do that. We could come over to our layout, design, and over here, click on that, and we could obviously delete the text in the text property. But there is another way of doing it in the code itself. So I'm just going to switch back now to Android view. And I'm going to double click main activity to open that up again. And just incidentally, clearing it in the layout is a perfectly good way to do it. Nothing wrong with doing that, but especially when you're starting out, it can be very useful to leave text in the text view widgets, as otherwise it can be hard to tell that they're really there and without looking at the blueprint or selecting them on screen. So the other way to clear them is to call its setText method and to provide an empty string. So I'm going to add that just below where we've defined this text view here. So I'm going to add that to line 25. So we can type text view dot set text, remembering case is important here, and 2 double quote characters, which signifies that we want an empty string. So unlike append, which adds text to any that's already there, and you saw this when we used the append command on line 31, we saw that the result every time we tapped the button got appended to the text view. So unlike that, when we use the .setText over here, that actually replaces all the text in the text view with the new text, whatever it is we've typed in between these double quotes. So by providing a blank string in this case, so in other words not putting anything in those 2 double quotes, we're replacing any existing text with nothing, which effectively clears what's already there in the text view. So the next thing to do is to add an S after time if the button has been clicked more than once. So we can do that down here. So we're now going to start on line 31. And I'm going to type if number times clicked is not equal to 1. And by putting the exclamation and an equal together like that, that stands for not equal. And then we type result plus equals S. And just incidentally, I'll make a note, this is the same as result equals result plus S. So what I've done here is, rather than checking for the number of clicks being greater than 1, I've checked for not equal to 1. That way, if we ever changed it to record the 0 before the button's clicked, it would still read correctly. And that's because in English, you'd say 0 times and not 0 time. That's not true in all languages though. And in fact, Android's got full support for dealing with translations into other languages, including the different way of phrasing things when there's 0, 1, or more than one of them. It's a good idea to design programs with international users in mind, but we're only at the start of this course, and I'm not going to do that now because frankly we've still got enough to think about at the moment. But I will be coming back to this, as it's the reason for the warnings we didn't resolve in the Layout Designer in previous videos. Okay, so that's 2 of our 3 problems sorted. There's just the scrolling to handle now. So I mentioned that the text view doesn't automatically enable scrolling just because we turned on the scroll bar, but the edit text widget does do that. In fact, the edit text just does what we're about to do automatically when scroll bars are enabled. That's one of the ways that it extends the text view. So what we need to do to activate this is to make a change to the code, and I'm going to come up here and add it after the set text line that we added. So here on line 26, we're going to type text view dot set movement method. I'm going to select that. In case is very important there. It's usually better to select from the list that shows and press enter rather than trying to type this. Firstly, it's quicker. Secondly, there's a greatly reduced chance of getting errors. And I'm going to type new scrolling movement method, like so. And you can see that code's added automatically by Android Studio. So calling the set movement method and passing it the new scrolling movement method is all that's needed to make the text view scroll. Now this only works because we added a vertical scroller in the layout, so that step is still needed. Alright, so it's time to test the program again to make sure we've ironed out these problems. So this time obviously we've got the emulator running and we've got the instant run icon showing. So we click on run and then just tab over to it quickly. Wait for it to restart, which it's done. Notice firstly we've got rid of the initial value in the text view, so that's empty. If I click on the button got tapped 1 time, click on again 2 times. So we've got our second problem fixed now. We've got the S being added. Wasn't added correctly when it said 1 time, but it was from then on when we tapped more than once. And now if I just go down a little bit further, we should find we can scroll a little bit now. And our scroll bar is now working. So that's our third problem licked. And if I just remove the keyboard and so we can go right off the screen, and we'll do a few more there. And now I should be able to scroll up and scroll down as well. So that's good. We've managed to actually fix all 3 problems. But did you notice there's still a problem there? So it's putting a blank line before the first message right here at the top. So I think that would make a good challenge for you. Now, by the way, if you haven't done any programming before, or you're new to Java and you want to learn a bit more about it, then you may want to stop the video here and come back to it after you've gone through the Java tutorial in the next section. And the other thing to note is that I do have a complete Java developer course. So if you want to learn everything about Java, you might want to check out my Java developer course. But certainly at the very least, there is a Java tutorial in this course in the next section. So if you're fairly new to Java, you might want to check either the Java tutorial or the full course before you actually proceed further. But if you've got some basic Java knowledge, or you just want to see how to do it initially, by all means certainly do that. At this point moving forward, the remaining videos in this section are going to be focusing on Java code, so you will find it a bit easier to follow if you know a little bit more about Java. If you're coming from another programming language or you know some Java, you're probably going to be just fine at this point in time. Okay, so on to the mini challenge, and it is quite a straightforward one. The challenge is to change the code so that a blank line isn't printed before the messages that you saw in the text view, but it is printed after them. So change the code so that a blank line is not printed before the messages, but it is printed after them. So pause the video now, go away and try that out. And when you're ready to come back and see our solution, start the video. So pause the video now and I'll see you when you get back. Okay, so how did you get on? Did you manage to figure out how to do that? Well, the solution is to add a /n to the end of the string before appending it to the text view. So here at the moment on line 32, we've actually got the /n at the start of the line. So what we want to do is you want to take that out, like that. Now you might think at first glance you can just put the /n there, but you can't actually do that, and that's because we're depending on the value of num times clicked, we are adding an s. And if we just put it in there, that would only work if, after the first one was printed, because the first time we ran through it would be equal to 1 and we wouldn't get that printed. So what we really need to do is remove them out of both of there, and I've obviously removed it from the start as well. And down here after this if, we need to type it in there. So we need to put here result equals result plus /n. And just to be clear, I did mention that before in this comment up here, but we could also put result plus equals n. So I won't leave both of these in because they are actually the identical code, but I just want to show you there are two ways of achieving the same thing. So we'll delete that first one out. Okay, so we're now making sure that no matter what is processed in terms of the button, whether it's the first time or second, third or so on, we'll always add a /n after we've processed that, and it gets appended to our text view. So let's just run that to make sure it works. Okay, we'll click on button. That's better. You can see we now haven't got the blank line. There is still a space between our edit text and the text view, but that's actually the normal spacing. That's the margins that we've defined here. So the extra line that was there previously has now disappeared, so that's good. There's still a problem though, when I'm going to show you how to fix in a later video. So remember I said you should always test your code in both portrait and landscape? Well, when I rotate the view, which I'll do here, just watch what happens to the messages. And could you see how they just disappeared? Let's move this over a little bit so we can see it. So I do the same thing. If I add a few here now, click on done there just so that opens up. And if I click on the button a few times, and then I go back to landscape, to portrait rather, the messages disappear again. So I'm going to show you how to deal with that in the next video, but I will tell you that the reason it happens is that Android actually destroys your activity when the device orientation changes, and then it creates it again in the new orientation. So that might take a moment to sink in because it sounds like a very strange way to do things. I mean, destroying the activity just because the user rotates the phone seems to be a bit drastic and extreme at first glance, the first time you think about it. But actually, it's a very elegant solution to a problem that's much more complex than it might appear to be. Now, it's true that that's what Android does, and you'll know it works because you've rotated your phone loads of times, and your apps have just carried on with the new screen size with no problems. So in the next video, we're going to extend the app so that it does something a bit more useful, and then we'll look at how to cope with changes in orientation when your application is running. Now, if you've never done any programming before and you didn't skip to the tutorials before the challenge, then you may want to skip over the remaining videos in this section and come back to them after doing the Java tutorials in the next section, or if you decide to invest in my full Java developer course after you've completed about 50% of that course. The rest of this section, though, is going to focus on Java code, and again, as I've mentioned previously, it will make more sense once you know a bit of Java. So I'll see you in your next video, whichever one it is, either the next one in this section or the Java tutorial. Cheers for now.